Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about the tank changes that Blizzard made on the beta this week. Guardian Druids received some really huge buffs. I put out an entire preview video for Guardian Druids where I detailed those changes pretty extensively. I did that last night, so you should check it out if you're interested. And you should be, because they're good. They weren't the only tanks to receive a lot of changes this week though, so I wanted to go over all of the tank changes in one place. Blizzard rolled out a ton of changes to classes last week. They made 2 changes on Thursday and 2 on Friday, as well as several sets of them earlier in the week. But multiple sets of changes in single days, multiple times during the week. Let's just take this class by class, and we'll start with Blood DKs. Blood DKs received a major damage buff. Some spells were buffed by about 10%, some were buffed by 15%, some were buffed by 20% or even more, but on average this is an increase of around 10 to 15% more damage for Blood DKs in all situations. This is great news for DKs. Their damage was on the low side, and this should bring them in line with the rest of tanks. DK also received 2 nerfs to talents that buff Death Strike's healing. They've gone from 30% extra Death Strike healing from talents to only 20% extra, so around an 8% total nerf to self-healing for Blood DKs. This hurts a bit. It makes the class a little less self-sustained, but it's still extremely tanky, so I don't think anyone should be too worried about DKs, really. I wouldn't even say it closes the gap between DK and any of the other tanks, like in terms of self-healing and defenses. I mean, I guess it literally does. They do less healing, and the other tanks still pretty much all do the same. But they're still so far out in front of everybody else when it comes to self-healing that I think they're just fine. They also gained a bunch of damage, which they really needed. Damage is more competitive now. Sure, the class lost some self-healing, but it was already very, very good, and it's still very, very good at self-healing, still super tanky. I think it's better now, even with the defense nerf, just as a more well-rounded tank that's capable of doing everything rather than basically being awful at damage output and only like a super tank. Druid received a ton of changes. I did a whole video about them, as I said earlier, and just to give the TLDR version, 50% bear damage buff, not to Moonfire, but to all of your bear damage skills. It's about 35% more damage overall, which is insane. They got a huge healing increase. They got a massive buff to Rage of the Sleeper, and Tooth and Claw now makes Maul free. So you get about 50% uptime on a 15% damage reduction buff, as well as a really big single target damage increase. Bear Druids are very good now, like very, very strong. Strong in Rage, strong in Mythic Plus, they're looking great. Now let's move on to Demon Hunters. Demon Hunter got a big nerf and a small set of buffs to compensate. Frailty, the stacking buff that was granting 8% more damage, 8% more leech, and 4% more damage reduction per stack, has been cut by 50%. So 4% more damage, 4% more leech, 2% more damage reduction. This is a big nerf to Demon Hunter's defensive layers. DH was the best tank in the game at mitigating magic damage and extremely strong at reducing physical damage as well, and now it's a bit more in the middle of the pack on the physical damage front. It's still very good at dealing with magic damage. I think this is all fine considering all the rest of the tools that Demon Hunter has in its kit. Huge burst damage, good self-healing, good defensive cooldowns. It can still be very good without baseline mitigation that's like enormous on top of all of that. The duration of Frailty has been increased from 5 seconds to 6 to compensate slightly, which I think is a good change. It increases the uptime of Frailty by 20%, and I think reliability on a defensive buff like Frailty is very important. This isn't enough to offset the nerf, but I think that's fine. I mean, it was an intentional nerf, and it's a pretty good, helpful move on Blizzard's part to compensate for that by making the buff easier to keep stacked. Blizzard also buffed all of Demon Hunter's base damage by around 10% to compensate for the nerf. So it's not much of a damage nerf. I would say for the most part, it pretty much is damage neutral. Maybe it's a small damage nerf in like some burst situations, whatever. It's mostly just a reduction to leech healing and damage mitigation, and both of those nerfs are pretty justifiable. One thing that Blizzard missed is Soul Crush, the talent that makes Frailty able to stack in the first place. It also makes Soul Cleave and Spirit Bomb apply an extra stack of Frailty to your primary target for 5 seconds. That extra stack is still only 5 seconds. Probably an oversight, hopefully an oversight, but there it is. Anyways, Demon Hunter is still a good tank. It still does a lot of damage, pretty good damage mitigation and self-healing as well. It still has great mobility. It's technically a little more reliable defensively, but it does take more damage now. It's still very good, just nerfed a little bit. Now let's talk about Blizzard's big changes to Monk and Paladin. Oh wow, we're done with this section. Now it's the beginning of Warrior nerf season. And they started with a nerf to Revenge and Thunderclap damage. 5% reduction in damage to the Revenge, 10% reduction to Thunderclap. Maybe a little bit more, like 11%. They also put Shield Charge on the GCD, which makes sense considering it's a stun and a huge damage dealing skill, but it is very annoying. Now, if you just spam Revenge and Thunderclap, you can do pretty good AoE damage on a Prot Warrior over a longer period of time, you know, the course of a Mythic Plus dungeon or whatever. It's not the best damage dealer, that is a Monk, but it can be pretty good in AoE. But in single target, Warrior's damage is pretty bad. It's one of the bottom tanks, and with Bear and Blood DK both getting huge buffs this week, Warrior is probably this worst single target damage dealing tank in the game. Oh, no, it definitely is the worst single target damage dealing tank in the game now. So now here's more nerfs. Improved Execute, the baseline component of Execute that makes it refund 20% of the rage cost if it doesn't kill the target, has been nerfed. It's now down to 10%. So in the past, if you used a full 40 rage Execute, you would have gotten back 8 rage, so it would have only cost you 32 rage, essentially. Now you only get back 4, so it would cost 36. This is essentially a nerf to rage generation during the Execute phase. The damage of Execute was also nerfed by about 8%. This is pretty bad for Warrior's single target damage, which was already not great. Later on, Execute's damage was buffed by 15%. Technically speaking, Blizzard removed the 15% damage reduction penalty that they had put onto Prot Warrior's Execute during Shadowlands, but that's still a 15% buff, so Execute's damage is up about 7 to 8% or so, but the rage cost of using it is about 12% higher. So this is a nerf, and specifically it's a nerf to rage, which is the most annoying way to nerf warriors. Nerfing rage generation makes the class slower, it makes it feel less fun and impactful, and it's just kind of boring. But it is effective, and Blizzard has rolled out another nerf to rage generation, a stealth nerf. Blood Surge, the talent that has a 15% chance to give you 5 rage at any time that your bleeds deal damage, has been changed to a 10% chance in the Phase 2 pre-patch notes. This is a good size nerf. It reduces your rage generation by about like a quarter of a rage per second per target. It's now worth about half a rage per second in single target, which is right on par with some of the other talents in the tree that we either don't take or just don't like having to take, such as War Machine and Instigate. Well, now it's bad news time because Blood Surge has been nerfed again overnight on the beta and the PTR, and it is a stealth nerf. Maybe it's unintended, but it is the same on both of them. The proc chance there is now down to 7%, so it's worth 0.35 rage per second per target, making it the worst rage generation talent in the game in single target. In AoE, it's like fine, but this is a pretty big loss. It is a loss of about 2 rage per second in 5 target AoE, and in 4 to 5 target AoE, I would say I generate about 15 rage per second, so we're talking about a pretty significant nerf. This has ripple effects as well. You probably won't, well, you definitely won't have as much rage to cast Revenge in AoE, so AoE damage will be lower. That means you probably don't want to take the talent Barbaric Training now, so your Revenges will cost 50% less, but they'll also deal 25% less damage per cast. So just in general, this is a series of nerfs to Warrior that cascade out into a reduction in damage output in AoE and single target. They reduce your rage generation in both AoE and single target, and they just make the class a good bit slower. So like I said, it's the beginning of Warrior nerf season. I don't actually think this kills the class in any way. Quite frankly, it puts them on a downward trajectory, but to be real, Warriors are probably still the best tank in the game. They're probably still the best tank for literally everything in the game. They are a lot closer to the rest of the pack now. They were way out in front of this race for a long time, and they have steadily lost ground to where they're now like at the front of a much, much closer, like a conga line, basically. Nerfing rage generation is just such a bummer, to me at least. It's the most boring approach. It's very effective for making you feel weaker, but it also takes away a lot of the juice for good talents like anger management, and it just makes the class slower. Not a fun set of changes. I don't like it. Alright, outro time. Druids are really good now. And fun. DKs and Demon Hunters are both still very good. Warriors are still very good. Monks do insane damage and are good raid tanks, and Pallies are pretty good Mythic plus tanks. So every tank has something good going for it, at least. If this really is the first wave of nerfs to Warrior, then maybe class balance will be, shifting a lot over the next couple of weeks. But there's literally no way to know now. We just have to wait. Maybe this is all they wanted to do with Warriors and all of the tanks, and they're happy with all of the tanks right now. Maybe they're gonna spend the next week remembering that Monk and Paladin exist. Who knows? Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.